Hello there. Today you will learn how to use Google Cloud Console to authenticate your users. This tutorial was done by our really talented backend engineer, Xano. I hope you guys like it.
Hello everyone, welcome. In this tutorial, we'll learn to connect Google Authentication to our Webflow project. We'll use Webflow, WIS for interactions, and Xano for the database. The goal is to use this button to authenticate with Google and return as an internal user. So let's get started. All right. First, we need to set up our Google Cloud Console to get the necessary API keys to work with our Xano platform, which is where we'll make the connection. So the first thing we need to do is go here. I've already opened Google Cloud. I'll search for this site. I already have an authenticated user. You should have an authenticated user too, or you won't be able to access this platform. Since I've set it up, I see the console option here. So here we're going to create a new project. I just made one, but let's create another. In fact, let's go here. We'll go to Google Cloud Project. Tutorial, for example. Okay, I'll click Create. I need to select the right project. You'll need to wait a moment. Here we'll choose this one. Let it load. Okay, it's ready. Let's go in here. Next, once here, go to Apps and Services. In this tab, Apps and Services, then click on OAuth consent screen. Wait for it to load. You'll see this form. Here, select external users. You need to create it. Let's name the application OAuth tutorial. For email, I'll use my Gmail. Now, let's go to the app domain. The app domain is crucial or you'll get errors. So let's go to Webflow, to our configured project. Since I'm working with staging, I'll check the website here. I need the URL, just this part without the path name. Let's go to this section. I'll remove the slash. Then we need to add an authorized domain, which serves as a domain. Okay. A scheme spec, it shows if there's an error. Let's remove this. Done, I have the authorized domain. If it asks for this value, I'll use the same for testing. Ready. I'll save and continue. This is the first setup you need to do. Next, we'll generate the necessary API keys. Nothing else to add here, by the way. Let's save and continue. And save and continue again. Okay, we're all set. Summary done. Back to the panel. If I return, this should be configured. Auth tutorial. Now I need to go to the credentials section. In the credentials section, we'll generate new credentials, create credentials. We'll select Auth client ID. This is basically what we need. Application type, in this case, is a web application. Let's name it Auth tutorial keys. We'll use authorized JavaScript origins if needed. The origin is basically this. So let's copy it. Done. Authorized redirect URLs. This is crucial as the process works with redirects. It needs the URL we'll send, which you'll see soon. This setup is necessary to avoid permission errors. Okay, we have all this. Let's click Create. It gives us info, client ID, and client secret. We'll download the JSON, which is most practical. Let's go here. I have the file and I'll open it in Visual Studio. It's unformatted, so I'll format it. And I have all the information. These are private values, so don't share them. I'm showing it now, but I'll delete it later. This is just for a test. All right, we have all this saved. Let's click Accept. Next, we'll go to Xano to configure the APIs to work with this platform and set up redirects correctly. Okay, Now that we're in Xano, we need to be in our dashboard, our workspace. We need to install the extension. Xano provides many pre-made configurations for working with external platforms. This makes the work much easier. So we need to go here to Marketplace. Let's go to Feature, as it's a well-known extension. We click on User Authentication. Inside, we'll find the Google Loadout option. Google Loadout is an extension that will basically install 4 endpoints, a database if it doesn't exist, or add to the existing database 3 functions and 2 environment variables. Here we click Install Extension and it'll ask for some info. For example, it asks which database or table you want to use. In case I already had one, I already have the user table. So it's going to join that table. What it's creating is a new thing called Google Loadout, which is basically a JSON structure, right? So we have this. Let's click Install. After installing, we'll check that everything is set up correctly. First, let's go to the database. I'll check user. And yep, here I have the Google Loadout field added. Let's go to API, the Google Loadout folder with the Marketplace label. We have 4 endpoints created successfully. Now the first continue endpoint handles both login and sign up. What does that mean? If you're already registered, it'll log you in. It'll give you authorization. And if you're new, if your user isn't in the database yet, it'll create it and give you access right away. I like using this because it simplifies those 2 flows. But it depends on how you want to handle it. Now we have Google Init. This one's crucial as it's the first step in the entire flow. When we execute this endpoint, we'll only provide an allowed redirect URL, and it will return, or rather send us a page to authenticate on Google's side and give us an authorization code. This authorization code will be used by the continue function actually. Continue requires the authorization code. So let's go here. In fact, the next endpoint we have is login. Login is the same as continue, but only for logging in. If you're already logged in, it'll throw an error. So keep that in mind with this flow. And sign up is similar. If you're already registered, it'll throw an error. This is useful if you want to handle it separately, or if your logic depends on it breaking intentionally to manage a separate process, for example. In my case, I'll delete it since I won't be using it. Actually, this endpoint above works for both as an example because they require the same values. It asks for code and redirect URI, just like continue. So let's delete these 2 endpoints. They're the ones for this case. Once I've cleaned this up, I'll go to settings to check the environment variables. I already have the environment variables pre-configured. I'm going to delete them. The first is the client ID from the JSON we downloaded earlier. We have the client ID inside. I'll copy it. And the second would be the client secret. I'll copy that too and save. Now, to test if it works and we don't have permission errors, let's go to the endpoint and start with Google Init. Let's run it. For the redirect URL, we'll use this endpoint. Well, this URL to be precise, because this is what we set up on the Google platform. So let's go back to this part here. We removed the n dash as it's just for redirection. Now we have a unique URL to authenticate with Google. If I go here and copy paste it, at this point we're on Google's side. It'll ask for an account. So let's proceed. Let's try logging in. I'll click continue. And done. Everything is working correctly here. I've been given a code. It provided more values. In fact, it gave scope and open ID. In this case, we only need the code. Let's verify it works properly. I'll copy this. This should be the code. If you prefer, I can copy the full URL. I could use Postman to pass URLs faster. And here I have the value. And this value is URL formatted, so you'll probably need to format it if you want to test. I'll try here in the console. If I pass the value directly, it'll error. To avoid this, let's format it correctly. We'll use URI with the same value. I'll use sign up as an example. Let's enter it here. For this example, we'll remove this just to test. As I said, this is incorrectly formatted. Since I'm testing from here, it won't parse. I'll create a variable to test. In fact, we'll remove this later. Let's see, remove this. All right, okay, I'll name it code. The value will be the input's external code formatted as code. In this case, it'll just be a code URL. Let's save it. Here, we'll change the variable we're sending. It won't be the external code, but the variable just for testing. Alright, the next function doesn't require code, so we're good. Now I'll run this. It works as expected. We know everything's set up correctly. We have the token and name. This token is our internal one to use. If I check the database, I should see that my user has been created and properly configured. I'll go here and I have all this info. My name, email. Google shares all this. In the next section, we'll connect this to Wized and secure the roots so you can see how to implement this in your login or sign up. Now, we'll set up USD APIs to interact with the web and use buttons. The first thing we'll do, as you noticed in the previous example, I was using the light database, but you'll probably want to make it dynamic. First, it's advisable to create a variable here that we can use as a data source. I'll just call it test for now, but we could add a conditional to check if it's in test or production mode to affect different databases and avoid mixing data. Once we have this, the next step is to create an app. Let's add an app here. I'll call it Google Auth. This will be a REST API, and the base URL will be the one in this folder. I'll go back to the main folder, copy the base URL, and paste it here. This is our base URL. Okay, and now we're ready to start creating the first requests. The first request will be the init one, so let's create the Google init here. Google OAuth. I'll create a new folder to organize it. Google OAuth. In fact, this always has to be structured like this. No spaces, okay. I'll choose this folder and save it. I'm in this folder. Inside, I have this. We'll choose from what we've created. And in this case, the method would be, let's see, it's a get, and the endpoint would be the path. For this, I'll copy the endpoint URL, I'll paste it, and only keep the path, which would be this Google init. Now for parameters, we saw this requires a URL, a redirect URL. So let's add it here. The value would be the redirect underscore URL, and for the value, we can actually use the href. The href basically contains the URL in question. I'm on sign up and I want it to redirect to that page, returning once the authentication is complete. So if I do a console log to verify the href, we see the full URL is Google Auth sign up. We have this. I'll remove this actually. Okay, we have the href now, but on our platform, we've configured the redirect. It's not allowed with sign up. So we need to go configure that part. I need to go to the credentials section. In the existing credential, I enter the settings. I've already done this for testing, but it was like this before. Now we set this up correctly. The saving part, this depends on your needs. If you make changes, remember it might take a few minutes. It says it can take hours, but for me, it's usually just minutes. Okay, we have the first request set up. Another thing we need to do is add an Xdata source header. This tells it which database value to use. If you don't send anything, it'll use the live database. But I have the variable set, so I'll send the value. Done. I have the first endpoint configured, and I'll make this button trigger that event. So I've already put a value here. If I go to Webflow, I'll see this. I already have the Googlebot with attribute. I've placed it previously. Now I'll click and go to the action. Let's create a click event. We'll prevent failure if it's in a form. And I'll generate a request. I want to execute the request. To avoid double execution, it'll run only when not already running, right? Google auth.init.is requesting. Let's set a simple condition of false. So let's clean this up. I'm going to redo the canvas. I'll click to see what happens. And indeed, it gave me the URL. If I copy the value, it's returned here, but that's because I logged in recently. It detects I'm logged in and redirects automatically. But if you've never logged in with that user or you're on a new computer, you'll likely see the Google form instead, right? On their platform where they choose the authentic user. All right, we've got this part done. Next, we'll configure the continue endpoint and save the generated token. Now let's set up the next request, which is the Google continue. We need to go to request and create a new one. It'll be Google Auth continue. The default will be Google Auth. The app will be the same since it's in the same folder. The URL will be the endpoint path, which is auth Google continue. I'll copy and paste this here. That's it. For URL parameters, it asks for code and redirect. All right, yeah? So we know the code comes from the URL. For example, here's the one I ran earlier. We can see the code comes as a parameter. First, we need to create the value in navigation here. In data store, we need to create the code value for recognition. Well, in this case, it's code. Let's remove this one here. I think I had already created it. I have the code. So let's go back to the request. In the request, we'll grab the value end.parameter.code. If I click this, well, it's null here. But if I add a parameter on the canvas simulated, of course, let's use test. Check in the canvas, it has the code test here. If I run it, good, here's the test. Something might have happened with Wized. So we have the value set up correctly. For redirection, it's the same at the href point. Now, if I run this, you'll see it also brings the parameter. So we need to remove this. For this, we just need a split or separation. We'll split by the question mark. And we'll take the first value. That's it. Done. If I run it again, I get the path I originally needed. So we're good up to this point. Now let's add the header, which is Xdata source. Always add this. It's how Xano detects which database to use. Okay, we have it like this. Now we need to take action. We need to make it so when it reloads and reaches this page, if it finds a code, it executes the next request. This way we can retrieve the generated token. So let's go to events. We'll create a new event. We'll put Google Auth here to keep it in a folder. Here's Google Auth. We now have a folder. Let's create here. Google Continue event. Done. The name can be anything, actually. Let's save it here. That's fine. We're inside Google Auth. I had already created this folder. I'll remove it. So let's continue with this. Okay. The trigger will be when the page loads, but only if the code parameter is not null. If the code parameter is in the initial GET request, we'll execute this action, which differs from the others. If it's not there, just a second option. So in the action, we'll execute a request for Google OAuth continue. I'll polish this externally so it's visible from there. All right, it's published. Let's go to the page. Ready. Let's open the console to view the requests. I'll remove this. This code shouldn't be here. Done. Okay, we're clean now. Okay, I'll click here to do the redirect. Oh, we need to capture the value and redirect to this page. So we'll create a new event called after get Google URL, right? For example, let's put it inside Google OAuth. The trigger will be when the request finishes, right? When it's done, I'll get this value and redirect. So let's go to Google iNet. When the request ends successfully, Google OAuth iNet status should be equal to 200. Once this is done, we'll execute and navigate to that page. The URL would be r.googleauthenticated.data. The value would be this one here, OAuth URL. Ready? Let's post here again to see how this all happens externally. I'll remove the default value so it doesn't interfere. Let's post again. Done. Okay. Let's open the console again and test it. It redirects. And indeed, something's happening here. The continue has already passed. Let's prepare it again. I'll keep the log to review what happened again. Let's remove this. Okay. Done. It made the main request. Let's log. Init. And then continue was executed. And continue already brought me the token. Next, I'll save the token and create a protected page. We have a different page, the dashboard for now, but it's still protected by token. So let's create a new simple logic. With that, we'll have all the functionality completed. All right, now I'm going to protect the dashboard root. Look, if we go here, let's see, I'll go back to the sign up page. I'll navigate to the dashboard. I want to protect this root. Basically, if the token isn't set in a cookie, redirect to the main page. In a real app, validation would include user verification with a token. If the token is valid, right, let them in. If not, don't. But here it'll be very basic. I've already created an access control folder to keep things organized. Here I'll create a new event. It'll be for verification. Let's give it a name. Verify token. It'll be inside access control. The trigger, when the page loads on /dashboard and the token doesn't exist, c.token. If it's null, what I wanted to do in this case is to redirect to the home page, which would be sign up. Let's navigate to sign up. Now it's ready. If I go back to sign up and try to access dashboard, it won't let me through. It's redirecting me. We don't have a loader, so you see that quick change, but in a real app, this should be more polished. So we have this first validation, and now I'll create the necessary cookies and variables I'll use across pages. I'm already using one called token. So in data store, I'll create a new cookie called token to detect the value. I need the token cookie, and I'll create another to store the username, save it, and display it elsewhere. Let's call it username. I'll treat this as session storage, not as deep as local storage, so we're good with this. Now, I'll start saving the token after this. Once Google Continue finishes, we'll create a new event called After Google Continue. For example, I'll save it in Google Auth. When the continue request ends, and if everything went well, we'll check for status 200. If all's okay, we'll set a cookie. In this case, it'll be c.token, and its value will equal r.google authcontinue.data.token. Besides that, I want it to redirect me to the dashboard. So we'll set it to navigate to dashboard once done. I have all the basic setup here. I'll hit publish and let it do all the work there. Let's show it F12. Always check the app here. Let's look for cookies, tokens. No token here or there. Local storage empty too. We're good. I'll log in. Let's see what happens. Indeed, I navigated to the dashboard smoothly. I saved the name because there was a small marker saying, welcome user. Basically, I want to change it. I want to display the logged in user's name to make it look nicer. So for that, I'll go to the page. Well, since I can't log in, I'll check the welcome message div value. Let's change it. We'll create a new event. We'll directly find the element. In this case, the welcome message will have the rendering as plain text. It'll be r.google.com. No, it'll be b.username directly. Because when redirecting, the request is lost. Here I'm keeping the record, but only to visualize the request is lost. So I put it in a variable before it changes. We have b.username, comma, but I don't want it to be b.username. It would be, for example, welcome and b.username. In fact, this goes outside. I'm getting an error here. Okay, now I'll publish this. I'll delete the token to show the example again. I'll reload. This should log me out back to the basic URL. I'll log in. Okay, it's giving me null. I'm probably not saving values correctly. It's likely in the Google out after Google continue part, I'm not saving the name values. So I'll create a new action here. I'll tell it to set a variable. The variable would be username. Right, we forgot this. Well, I forgot this. Okay, let's set it to r.googleoutcontinue.data. And since I don't recall the return value, this returns a name. It returns a full value, a complete name. I'll just save it, post it here, and that's it. Okay. I'll delete the Wander token app again, remove it, and reload. Now let's test it again. Great. Now we have the full name. That's all for this tutorial. Remember, it's always good to review the documentation further to understand how things work behind the scenes.
and to implement more specific behaviors if your application requires them. Well, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Feel free to comment just below the video and we'll respond shortly. Thanks a lot.